Hello, I'm Kitty and this is a tall sky stitch tutorial. So this is a tutorial for the kits that only need 4 stitches, so the square ones. If you're making a rectangle kit like this, then you want to be watching the other stitch tutorial that's on the channel. So in your kit, amongst other things, there will be a embroidery hoop, a needle threader, a bobbin of thread that is labelled tester, and this is separate from your other threads that you need for the kit, and a sampler with 2 needles, a big one and a small one. You will also need embroidery scissors, or any scissors. This is the sampler. This is my test print, so it's quite blurry. Hopefully yours won't be as blurry as this. It takes you through the 4 stitches that you'll need, which are backstitch, whipped backstitch, chain stitch and satin stitch. And you can basically use the sampler however you want to. You definitely don't have to complete all of it. If you already know some stitches and are unsure of some, just do those ones, or just practice the stitch until you feel comfortable and leave it. This is basically what the sampler looks like if you've completed the whole thing. So just to take you through the stitches, backstitch is basically the most basic stitch. Sorry, should have been ironed. Backstitch is the most basic stitch. It's just a series of small stitches that goes in a line, and you can see the break between each stitch. Whipped backstitch is basically you do a line of backstitch and then you thread your thread through it so it makes a solid line. And with whipped backstitch, you can either do this in one colour like I've done here, which makes this solid bold line, or you can do it in 2 colours. So you can see here I've done whipped backstitch in 2 colours and it makes it stripy. The next stitch is chain stitch, so called because it looks like a chain. Again, super easy, I'll show you how to do that. And then satin stitch, which is basically the colouring in stitch. You use it to fill in shapes. So if you're a beginner, I'll just go through these various items quickly. So the embroidery hoop, it comes in 2 pieces and you tighten it with this thing here. You screw it and unscrew it. These are the 2 pieces, and when you're sewing you always want to have your fabric in the hoop. So this bottom bit with no tightener goes at the bottom, and this goes on top like that, and you can tighten it like that. The needles, I've given you 1 big and 1 small, and that just kind of depends on your preference for sewing. The small ones are good for small delicate things like lettering, or if you've got small curves. The big ones are better for if you're just doing sort of long lines of backstitch or chain stitch, but it's kind of up to you. I use a small needle all the time when I sew because it just gives me more control. Obviously the small needles are harder to thread than the big needles, so some people like to use the big needles, but leading on from that, if you do have difficulty threading your needle, then there is this, the needle threader, which I will show you how to use in a second. This is the thread. Be careful not to use the other thread that I've given you, otherwise you won't have enough to complete your kit. This won't necessarily be in this colour, and neither will your sampler be in this colour either, because I use my excess material and excess threads to make these to reduce waste. I have also given you a lot of this thread, definitely more than you'll need, so you will have some left over, but if you make a mistake whilst you're practicing you can just start again. So I will show you how to start a piece. The main number 1 thing to remember for this kit and all of the kits is that you're going to need to start by splitting your thread. I don't know if you can see, but these threads come in strands of 6 thread, and for all of the elements on each piece you only use 3. So you want to start by taking out maybe like 30 or 40 centimeters of thread and cut it. And I think there are lots of different ways to separate thread. I think there are probably better ways than how I do it, but the way I do it is I just tap it out like that and get 3 in one hand, 3 in another hand, and then just very gently pull it apart. If you pull it too hard, then you'll get a knot, so don't be aggressive. So now you've got your 2 things of thread, put this one somewhere where you'll find it, and then you want to make a knot. So the way I make a knot is by winding it around my finger once like that, and then I just roll it down and pull. But you can also just make any kind of knot you want, as long as it's not going to be able to be pulled through the fabric, then you're fine. So then you want to take whatever needle you want. I'll go with a small one, and you want to thread your needle. So if you're finding it difficult to thread your needle and you don't want to, when you can't be bothered to use the needle threader, I would always just cut a little bit more off so it's straight, and then it's much easier to thread, and just make sure you've got a good light, then it should be fine. If you want to use the needle threader, this is the way to do it. The way you do it is you get the end of the needle threader, put it through the eye of the needle like this, then you get your thread, put it through the needle threader like that, which has got a big hole in it, so that's quite easy, and then you just pull it through. Yeah, you might need to just wiggle it through like that and then pull that out. So that's all the different ways you can thread your needle. So once you've threaded your needle, you want to secure your fabric in your hoop, so split it into 2 parts, put the bottom part underneath like that, get it to the bit you want to do. So if you're starting with backstitch, put it like that, and then put it over like that and tighten it, because you want the fabric to be really taut in the hoop. If it's kind of moving around, it's harder to control and harder to sew. So you are basically ready to go now. So for backstitch, you have your threaded needle here. Obviously, as we're doing a circle, you can just start anywhere. You come up wherever you want to start on the line, and then you want to go back down. Maybe this is a 3 or 4 millimeter length stitch, something like that, and you pull it through. Then you go sort of a similar length down and going back like that, pulling it through. That's why it's called backstitch. Can't really think of much more else to say about this. It's quite straightforward. What you need to remember with Tall Sky kits is that I digitally print the patterns on the fabric. They're not the kind of kits where you can wash the pattern off after you've sewn it. The black lines just will stay on the fabric forever. So you need to remember to sew over the black lines instead of around them, because if they're visible, they will remain visible. Although saying that, it really doesn't matter if you go out of the line occasionally. So there is a little circle of backstitch, and I will show you now how to finish off your thread. So once you've finished the bit that you're doing, or if your thread has run out, you need to finish your stitch. Otherwise, if you leave it, it will just come unraveled. So it's very easy. What you do is you just, at the back, make 1 or 2 small stitches like that to make a knot, just going over again and again, and then cut it. And you want to cut it quite short, because if you get long tails hanging off, then you'll get knots. So the next one is whipped backstitch. So the first thing I'm going to do is readjust my fabric, because you don't want to be sewing very close to the edge of the hoop. So you want to try and get that bit in the middle, like that, and then put it down like that. So as the name suggests, whipped backstitch is very closely related to backstitch. So you start the exact same way as backstitch. You start with a line of backstitch. So I will just do that. Something to remember actually, just as I'm doing this, is you don't always want to be sewing right next to this gold screw thing, because your thread gets caught on it quite a lot. So if you find that happening, just swivel your hoop around so the gold thing is far away from you, if you can be bothered. So you have your line of backstitch. Then what you want to do is you want to whip it. So if you're trying to make a stripy line, this is when you then go in with your second colour. But if not, then just carry on with the colour you're using. With the whip backstitch, you want to come in anywhere on the line. Obviously, if you're doing a straight line, then come up at the end. And then you want to get your needle and you want to pass it through underneath the stitches. So, like that. Well, the main thing to remember with whips backstitch is that you just always have to go from the same side. So here I'm just going from the outside in. If you now start going from the inside out, it's not gonna look good. That's actually a different kind of stitch. You finish it, go back around the stitch that you started, and then finish it by just going in like that. The next stitch is chain stitch. This is maybe one level of difficulty up from the last two. So come up there or wherever you want to start, then you put your needle back through like that in the same place that you came up, and then through this loop, the same length as a backstitch, you pull it through, and that is your first chain link. And then you just basically do the same thing. So your needle goes down through where you came up from, and then pull it like that. The real thing that can go wrong with a chain stitch is if you're pulling your needle through and it gets caught on the thread, it's not sort of a clean pull through, then it becomes knotty. And if you do get a knot in a chain stitch, you kind of have to go back to the beginning, because they all come unravelled once you start to try and unpick it. So you can see I've got about this amount of thread left. Because I'm quite stingy, I would probably try and make it last to the end, but that's actually not a good thing to do. So probably a bit less. You would probably keep going for a bit more. So 1 or 2 more stitches. See, look. I've done something bad here. I was about to pull this needle through, and you can see, I don't know if you can see, but I've gone through this thread, and that would just be a disaster. So just make sure you're pulling it through. Yeah, so once you've got like about this much left, you want to finish your thread. So to finish the chain, you just put your needle through there and pull it down like that. Finish it off like this. Cut. And then you just want to start a new thread. So starting again, you just want to bring your needle up through the middle of this chain link and then just keep going. The last stitch is the satin stitch. This is probably one of the more labour intensive stitches, but it is also one of the more mindless stitches. It's basically like colouring in, so you can really zone out whilst you're doing it. I'm going to be filling in this sort of disc here. If you wanted, you could fill in the big circle in the middle. If you're filling in a shape like a circle or a triangle or anything that has a longer bit and a shorter bit, my recommendation would always be to start at the longest possible bit and then work your way out and work your way out like that. You can just be a lot more accurate. But that's not the case with this, which is just a line basically. People worry when they're doing satin stitch because they feel like they're not being neat. And when you're sort of looking very closely in, it sometimes doesn't look neat. But when you take a step back from it, you can never ever tell any mistakes. And then the other thing to remember is that you always need to sew on the outside of the black lines instead of on the inside, otherwise the black lines will show. So just start anywhere and make your first stitch. The stitch needs to sort of cover the shape, and then you just want to go round and round, always in the same direction. So I'll always be starting from here and then going to there. It might be tempting to now start coming from up here and sort of go like that, because that does save thread, but it makes it look much less even. So obviously, because you're doing a curved shape, there are sometimes going to be little gaps. So if I wanted to fill in this bit, I would maybe start from here and then go like that. And there's a gap here, so just all you do is just go back over. Yes, that is the beginning of your satin stitch. So hopefully you've got the idea there. I also go through in my kit videos, more specifically how to do the stitches for each element of the kit. But this is just to get your basics or to remind you. And if you still have any questions, then do just get in touch and I'll help.